Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Al Walters, and I'm the Vice President here of the Elgin Area Historical Society. And we are absolutely thrilled to see this big a turnout for a Sunday afternoon program in the middle of the summer, at the end of the summer. So again, thanks for coming. And we do think we have a great program for you tonight. This was built as, of course, the history of the D.C. Cook Publishing and a little dose of family history as well mixed in. And we'll get there in just a second. But we also built it as a mystery portrait. The mystery portrait is a red Victorian lady hanging in the gold frame on the side wall there. We might as well end that mystery right now. That's Mrs. Marguerite Cook. That's Mrs. David C. Cook the first. The mystery about it was she bubbled up out of the archives of the First United Methodist Church, where the Cooks were very active. But over the years, nobody remembered who she was. And we did a little research, and we identified her as Mrs. Marguerite Cook. And that trail led me to Bruce Cook, and that led us to, why don't we do a program? So now you're up to date. So I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. Cook's great-grandsons, Greg and Bruce Cook, and I know they'll talk about other family members in the room. So can I turn it over to you, Bruce?
I'm going to turn it to Greg.
And what was I supposed to say?
I don't know. Let's try something.
Well, I bet you didn't know there were so many cooks. We're still around. So Bruce and I are here. We're the two brothers in the fourth generation. Okay, if we're talking back from David C. Cook the first, David Caleb Cook. So our dad, David C. Cook the third. So Bruce and I share a brother, and our three sisters are here as well. So I think we should stand up. Say hello.
Stand up.
Well, you know. Thank you. And I'm not even mentioning the extended family. We should have them stand up too. Yeah, please. So you guys stand up too. So now we're into the fifth generation, right?
Right.
Counting back.
Keep going. I don't know why that is.
Right. Sixth. Okay, I'm not really very good at the genealogy, so correct me if I get the number. So, yeah, would you explain what we're doing here?
What are we doing?
On the number, on the recollection slide.
I thought we'd do a kind of a history of the family, a history of the company. And ultimately, we'd like to do, what we hoped to do was to show the impact of the company on Elgin, the positive things that were done. And I'm afraid we couldn't really corner all those things, but we've tried to put this all together. So if you watch the Royals recently on TV, you realize it goes back and forth in time. You know, we go to a prince and back to a king and so on. We'll be doing that. We don't have any kings. But we'll be going through, Greg and I have kind of shared a way to split it up. Greg is really conversant on the history of David C. And I'm a guy who likes to do slideshows. So we have that combination. So with that, let's look at a fire.
Right. Okay, so we all know about the Great Chicago Fire, so let's put it in a little bit of a context with David C. Cook before he came to Elgin. So we're going to start when David was about 18 years old, and then we'll backtrack from there later. So we're talking about the year 1868. The fire was in 1871. Okay. So a few years before the fire, Ezra Cook moved the family to Chicago. And Ezra opened up a printing shop where David went to work, which of course became beautiful preparation for his later success in publishing. So David was what was called a printer's devil. So they were like, I think of them sort of like, you know, today's computer programmers. They were in charge of communication, but instead of electronic, it was type. They were the ones that were just, you know, learning how to set type, and they were really the cool kids. So David came and set type as a printer's devil for a year with his dad. Before the sewing machine business across the street recruited him to come work for them. So he spent a year working with the sewing machine business as a salesman. They called it waiting on trade. So he's waiting on trade. And what he learned there was interesting, but we'll get into that later. So let's talk about the fire in 1871 in the autumn before the fire. David had already worked his way up at the sewing machine business to become owner of that business. He did an amazing amount before he was even 21 years old. So he had figured out that he could order sewing machine accessories from foreign suppliers cheaper than they were made here and of a higher quality, so that he could sell them direct to consumer at a lower price. So $1,000 worth of needles had arrived, and he put them into the safe along with his business records and cash that he had. This was all right before the fire. You might have thought it would be protected in the safe, but the fire roared through Chicago, an incredible event, obviously, and it took down everything. David lost everything from his business because that safe was never found again. That was totally buried under the debris, and that was gone. The only good news for David Jr. is he lived in Wicker Park, so his house wasn't burned down.
Okay.
Flip to needles.
To needles.
There's your needles. So, his father had given David Caleb a spot in the printing company office with a desk after the fire. So somehow they worked this out. I'm getting that mixed up. That would have had to have been before the fire. So David is laboriously assembling names because he's figuring out that to sell direct to the public meant he was going to have to travel, and roads weren't, wasn't so easy to travel in those days. So he had to come up with a different idea of delivering, and he came up with the mail order concept. So this was the time when the Sears catalog was being developed. So there was this way of thinking that, we could sell by catalog and we could distribute nationally. We wouldn't have to sell locally, and we wouldn't have to travel to deliver our supplies. So if all of that sounds pretty familiar, that's the exact same way the David C. Cook Publishing Company operates. Bruce and I both worked at the company at the same time in the early 1970s, right? Late 70s, early 80s. We were both at the company. So, I'm just remembering the whole thing about the mail order business. So he kind of came up with this brilliant idea, and he used that to develop the distribution later of his company. And it just all started with sewing machine needles.
Okay, the needles. After the fire, here's what he's doing now. He's trying to start a religious publishing company. I don't know if he mentioned that, he had 3 big Sunday school classes going.
I didn't mention
That he was teaching, and he saw the need, and he saw the lack of materials to teach with, lesson helps they called them then, and he wanted to do some of that, so he wanted to get some money. He couldn't just start this without doing something. Well, there was some asset, so he's selling off his assets, and these little clips we got from Chicago Tribune. And believe me, I want to mention that I didn't do this all alone. My sisters helped me a lot to get the content of this. But anyway, so he's selling a new and latest Singer sewing machine for $32, and he wanted to exchange 50 sewing machines. This is his assets. I guess they weren't in the fire. Maybe they were in Wicker Park. And he's selling that. And then he wants to get a business wagon to be paid for, in part, by a sewing machine of any desired kind. And he wants to get this business wagon, you can see the picture, that he hopes to have to move his materials to the post office in this new venture. So he's starting something from scratch, and pretty tough even today to do something like that. This next one gets into him hiring, this is also Tribune, looking for a boy, one who writes nicely with good references, right? And then for girls, he wanted girls to work in the bindery, so they could help, putting things in packages and shipping things out. So that is kind of the way it began. And later on, I remember seeing in Earl Heindel's book over there that women weren't even allowed in the business office in the early years. So, but this is not, I don't think it wasn't David C. Cook. I think it's the historical times. And the thing we're dealing with now, the status of women and the recognition of them and their vast importance in any effort of any kind. So, next one, YMCA. Yes, this is what I remember as the YMCA. I remember going to Gaylord Thompson, give him a quarter, and you could stay there all day and go in the pool and everything.
Yeah, I remember swimming at the Y after day camp. Yeah, but it wasn't the Y before that.
Some of you might not remember that, but only us young people. But here's the original building, and it looks so nice, like it was on sale. But this is the reality of it over here that Al has found. I guess it's over in the Gifford restaurant that just opened up.
Yeah, here's a great picture of it with the wooden bridge in front of it. This is before cars, right?
Before cars. Yeah.
This is not even 1900s yet. So this is horse and buggy across that wooden bridge.
And I want to mention Mr. Alf. We all know Mr. Alf was our community historian who couldn't be here today. I think Marky actually invited him, but he just can't for his health. And
He's in Pennsylvania.
he noticed that they're producing all these letters and packages, so they really had a lot to do with the development of the Elgin post office, because there was a vast volume of materials going through there. And in this case, he's documenting as 6,425 letters. And don't let that be 24. He had it right, and weighing 21 tons. So that was also part of the development of Elgin. Over to you.
Oh, David and Marguerite. We need to tell you about Marguerite, although you've already heard about Marguerite. So these two got together and were collaborators on the content of the Sunday School Helps. And we really probably should have talked more about the fact that during the time David was starting his business, he had bought out the sewing machine business. He was working full-time there, but he was working evenings and weekends building up his Sunday schools. And his wife was very involved with the production of materials. I mean, we probably should explain what helps means in case, that's not necessarily common language. So a lesson help or Sunday school help taken literally just means, volunteers were in the Sunday school and they needed help teaching the lessons, okay? It was kind of that, and not just, volunteers in the classroom with the children, but in those days you typically had, and even now to some degree in larger churches, you'll have superintendents, Sunday school superintendents, so they were the leaders that were a little higher up the hierarchy there. But oftentimes these were not large churches and the volunteers needed help. And that's what David C. Cook learned as he was building up his Sunday schools and he was recruiting people to help him.
We could mention too, for the teachers in the audience, that's your lesson plan. You have to have a lesson plan or you're lost when you come in.
Right. And actually Cook Publishing's materials is still known for that, still known for, being something you can just hand out to a teacher and they'll, even though, they're not necessarily up to speed on the lesson, it's all there for them. It's very, very clearly written. That's where I learned to write, was at David C. Cook Publishing.
That's right. And Greg wrote those, right?
Yeah, I was working
Could
on
you describe what you wrote, what you were doing?
I was in the adult curriculum. So, I wanted to mention that later about I.A.H, but
okay.
yeah. But I saw my first publications come off the press at Cook, and that was really exciting for me. So, I don't know how much people know about the publishing company that's still there on 850 North Grove Avenue, but the presses were right there, and that's not common. If you're a New York publisher, your presses are not in the building where your editors are, right? Your editors are in these high rises and they're doing all this glamorous work and the material's being printed elsewhere. But here it was all right in the building. So when I started here and got my first job and I got my first publication, I got to see that come off the press and that was pretty exciting. Yeah, even though the sheets were all crumpled up and they had,
You did it.
it was only two color, and the second color was green and black, so the green was just like smeared all over it. But I still enjoyed seeing my first publication come off the press.
Wonderful.
Where else can you do that? It's just downstairs over to the right. Let's go look at it.
Exactly, it was nice. So let's go to the next happy slide here. Marguerite. I was going to make a point here that Marguerite did a lot of writing. And she gathered, I think, friends and neighbors to help her, and maybe did some outside hiring, I don't know. But she was doing, do you want to mention this?
Well, she was working out of the house on Gifford Street,
house.
the Cook Mansion on Gifford Street that, Dan, you're going to talk about later, right? So, yeah, so she was working out of there, and she was handling like multiple departments. So they had the primary department, secondary departments. She was handling the editorial out of that house.
I wanted to mention these Here's a slide showing from the Inter-Ocean. You, of course, already read the Inter-Ocean, right, from 1883. But they donated a press. And this, you imagine, if he's starting in 75, by 83, he has a press he doesn't need and has it shipped off to India. It sounds incredible, but I was over there working for the foundation in 78, and Delhi was one of the places I went, and of course we visited different printing places, and I saw an old press, and there were many like that had been donated not only by Cook. So a lot of the presses in India at that time were American machines that were replaced by monotype and newer things. And the one I saw that I'll never forget was kind of like between two brick walls, like we see some restaurants sometime, and then in there was like a table with the type on it, and then this little roller would come by on big wheels down like 2 horse tracks and come across and put ink on the rollers. Then they'd place a paper on there and roll it back the other side. And there was the first Christian newsletter that they had for this particular missionary enterprise, and they come down with the ink again, paper on, and roll it across. I hope he had a little newer one than that, maybe not. But if he did, it wasn't fast enough. So that's my little story about that. Where do we go from there? Pioneer.
A lot of these publications are over on the tables on the side if you'd like to see them later.
That's right. Yeah, good stuff over there. Presses. This slide shows that he was involved with denominations. He was competing with them. It was non-denominational content. So if you're a pastor and you're buying from Cook, you're not real popular with the bishop because you're supposed to support the local, the say Lutheran or another publishing Augsburg, a publishing house that is affiliated, and they need you to be ordering from them. So that must have been a tough thing for them all the way through, and he was involved in the denominations, so he'd be a real living presence. That was a tough thing, I think, in sales and marketing. He got an award. I want to make a point here. Later, he developed what was called the Quarter Century Club. I remember my dad had a watch he got from Quarter Century Club because he'd been there 25 years. And although he was Presidente, that watch probably meant more to him than the title, And then I was talking to Scott Menke about who's over in the building now, that's left there at 850, and they still have a crew of about 20 over there. And somehow this came up, and I said, he was going to retire, and I said, you're probably waiting for the Quarter Century Club. He said, they came here, from Colorado, and they went up to Colorado, no, up in Wisconsin somewhere, and discussed starting that particular club again. So they're recognizing their employees again. So that's a good thing. Anyway, I want to mention that. Yeah, this is showing 1901 when the company moved to the new location, 850. And this Inter-Ocean, I think, featured the company as a modern company because they had the buildings in back and light would come through the ceiling and so on. It was quite innovative in its time. One point I wanted to make, the old location, the old YMCA, which had been a woolen mill, right, down in Chicago Street at the river, was flooding every year. You know how a river does. Every year you have some places flooding. Well, it flooded the bindery or something. So that was one reason for him to want to move. And of course, he made his own electricity and things. He was quite innovative that way. So that's how we got over there. And that's when they began.
Is anybody here who has worked at the company? Oh, we've got company people here.
Great. Keep us honest, you guys.
Yes.
Okay. That's wonderful.
Yeah, on the denominational thing, denominations were slow to get into the Sunday school publishing business. At one point, I believe it was in the late 30s, the Cook Company actually published a special edition for Episcopalian Sunday schools. I don't know how long it lasted, but when I was rooting around in the company records to do a graduate paper, I remember seeing those things. But eventually, of course, Episcopalians too got their own Sunday school publishing.
Wow, that's neat. Later, they had I hope I'm saying this properly, they actually would go to small denominations. Mostly were black denominations. And these denominations could not have a publishing house. So they would get the front cover of a publication. And then Cook would insert the rest would be standard items. And that was a thriving business when Greg and I left.
Yeah, so those were imprints. They were called the imprints.
Under Jim English.
Yeah, and Jim English was in charge of that. So, yeah.
great job. So that was really impressive too. So they had to reach out and build things out. He was an innovator, I think. Any other good comments? I don't want to skip anybody. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question, we're gonna go over it later. What are they doing in the building now? I mean, I know something's going on, but what is it?
Scott is here. Do
I
you want
should
to
talk about that.
We're still working. We're still putting out the boxes.
Oh, you're doing the boxes for the shipping?
It's just a warehouse and distribution now. There's no actual printing or anything going on.
Okay.
And when did the presses get shipped out or sold off? Was it
2003.
2003? So I wonder if any were donated to India. I have no idea.
The two biggest ones that we were still using, they sold. One went to New Jersey and one went to Peru.
Huh. The web. Okay, so when I started, the web press had just been installed. Okay, that was impressive. So was that sold?
Yes.
The web press.
Yes, that's the one that went to New Jersey. As far as I know, but he's still using it.
Yeah.
Hope so. Presses keep working. It's like old computers don't keep working, but presses do. Here are some photos from the 850 North Grove plant after it opened in that time period. I do have this book from Earl Heindel. He wrote a history, and in there we put some of the pictures that were published in 1901 in that Inter-Ocean or whatever it was, so you can look at those more closely. And this thing has an index to employees and everything in the back. Kind of neat to look at the history that way. But here are about 6 of those slides to show you the plant and a cafeteria.
I miss the cafeteria.
It's from the inland print. That's what, the cafeteria was the best part. Yeah, we had good times. Okay, and then packaging and mailing. On here's Earl Heindel up in the upper corner there. He was company historian, not officially, but that's what he did. And then when I came into work there, it was a few years before Greg, somebody gave me these typewritten sheets, said this is from Earl, the historian. He wants somebody from the family to have it, because he didn't know what would happen, you know, in terms of the company hierarchy. He wanted his story to be retained, and you'll see he wrote carefully about it.
So those are for sale, aren't they? Can people buy those? No?
They're on sale over here.
Yeah,
Yes, thank
I thought
you,
they were.
that's right. I don't know how much they're to benefit the museum. The other picture here is E.E. Stewart, who was there when my dad first started. And when you read the book, you'll see E.E. Stewart coming up again, Eddie Stewart. And he was actually my dad's best man at the wedding. So now I know he was married. Okay, we just want to establish that. And here are the publications. Examples of them, and you can find denominations over on the table there. You know, samples that we have. And Greg mentioned about trying to look at the Sears Roebuck catalog. They actually hired somebody from Sears Roebuck as a consultant while they were developing their catalog business. So that was a big thing in those days. We actually have examples there of little learners in the upper left. Dewdrops are back there. And then Ask Aunt Polly, which was, a little later we'll see Una, who wrote, no, this is George's, yeah. No, it's Lois Cook, my dad's sister, who died very unfortunately on Michigan Avenue after the World's Fair, and somebody hit her car. She was Aunt Polly, and you could write her for advice. Sunday Pick, some of you may remember. It's a colorful comic. You know, that was very controversial at first. Can you have a comic in church? Really? But it's very popular. And Scott says it's still in print. I'm so happy to hear that, you know. And so that's a good thing. So those are some of the publications.
Oh yeah, so I'll say the I.A.H. Club. I don't know if any of you, some of you might know about it. I remember getting my ring when I was little, the I.A.H. ring, standing for I am his. And this is a great example of how David Caleb Cook viewed his work as a very personal thing. He created I.A.H. circles of young people. So those are the two things that I think about when I think of David Caleb Cook first, is that he was very personal and direct, and that he enjoyed working with young people. And that's what shows in the I.A.H. club. In fact, it became so popular because he wanted young people to write into the company with their problems. Because when he was teaching Sunday school, he was hearing them, and he was able to talk with them in person then. But long distance, he invited people to write in. And as you might imagine, that just overwhelmed him. The mail that came in, and he couldn't handle it, and that's why he had to eventually have help. But that started with him. And this whole concept was really important to my dad too. So if we haven't said very much about our grandfather, David Carl Cook, but if you'll jump ahead to our father, David Charles III, our dad, I.A.H. Club was real important to him. So when I came to work at the company, he talked to me about this. And at that time, there was a publication called Leader, went out to Sunday school leaders, and Lucille Turner was the editor. And Lucille Turner was just retiring. And the company wasn't going to keep publishing Leader, but they felt like there was a necessity to continue with worship services for use in larger Sunday schools. And so that became my first publication. That hadn't existed before, so they had me do it and create it and start it. And Dad talked to me about it then, and he said, I am hoping that the tone and feeling of this publication is very personal, that you're really speaking directly to our Sunday school superintendents, and they understand this is real person-to-person communication, and that those services that you produce have the same effect on the young people that are in the room, that they will feel that this is real, direct, and personal. So it was a real personal side of faith. That's what the I.A.H. Club was all about.
I am his club.
Yeah. Right, that's good.
I was in, I had a ring. But where is my ring? I looked up on the internet, I found one church still using I.A.H. Club, and there's a church. That's something.
Oh, so I was going to say the Mother's Magazine too. So I did spend my career in publishing, and I moved from Cook's to Better Homes and Gardens. So I was there for 21 years in Des Moines, Iowa. And so I kind of have a feeling for George Cook, who was our grandfather's brother, and his creation of Mother's Magazine. Because for David C. Cook, this was a large circulation magazine of the type I had always wanted to work on, which was what drew me to Better Homes and Gardens. So this turned out to be very, very popular and successful for Cook Publishing, and there was nothing else like it in the company. In fact, it was so successful that George, who was the editor, wanted to move it to New York City, but his timing was awful. So he put, I used to talk about carrying a magazine in a box. Well, when I say that, I just mean the editorial content, the outlines, the pinups that I would go into an office and show what we're going to do for the next issue. But so that would have all been in the box that he sent to New York City. But more importantly were all of those names, the distribution list. What happens when you lose those? They were hung up in an embargo in World War II. Does it say, or World War I? It says that there. So that material was delayed long enough to where the magazine just died. And that was probably the most serious failure the company had ever faced, and about put them out of business. And of course, the old man pulled it through. I don't know how he did it.
He sold it to somebody. It's in Earl's book. I don't think it was so big. And actually now, if you look at Parents Magazine, they have a list of names you cannot use because they've copyrighted them. One is Mother's Magazine. So I often wonder if there was any negotiation there. We can't know.
I'm sure there was.
Yeah. Okay, here's Simrick Spring. This is George and his wife Una. We've heard about George. He married this girl, Una, from Springfield, Missouri, who, fortunately for us, wrote a complete account of her life. And so it's back there in volume 1 and 2, these two paperback volumes that were in the family. And of course, part of it involves Elgin, and quite excellent descriptions of Elgin. And the third car going to the 4th of July celebration with the boiler on the back. This was George's car, I guess, the third car in Elgin. And during the celebration with the fireworks, his boiler blew up a bunch of noise, and everybody turned around and thought that was a firework. And then afterwards, everybody came to see this new thing, a car. So those kinds of descriptions are in there of early accounts of Elgin by the wife of George, and you may want to take a look at those. That's kind of neat. Anyway, so that they were good people, and that family helped me to actually get this done. Scott Dunbar and the Dunbar family from St. Charles, and we were working on this and editing it. And Molly spent a lot of time with me doing editing of this, and then very discouraging, Scott died a few years ago. So we finally have finished it this year and got those things there. Oh, now we have the recollections again. So now it's your turn. Anybody have comments, questions? Just say.
Comment, my grandfather was E. Stewart.
That's right.
And my name's Tom Stewart, my wife Karen, and my daughter Carrie. Your father and my father were best of friends.
Yes, that's right.
Quite involved in the scouting program, and actually were one of the first Hiawatha dancers. Carl Alaska was their scout leader. And after talking to you the one day, I found some archives of their first merit badges that I should probably turn over to the museum that Carl Alaska signed. So yeah, I've heard numerous stories of Cook Publishing.
Yeah, that's neat. Dad was an Eagle, so he went through the program with him. Yeah, you always talked about Eddie as a very favorite person.
When I was a kid, I guess I was a real goofball, but my whole adult life I've been very much a workaholic, and I trace it back to David Caleb, who went to California because he had a nervous breakdown. I guess that's what they called it. And so he went then to this town, I think it's pronounced Piru or
Piru, maybe.
One or the other.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so he built a house there, one of the mansion type of things, and he did an orchard of all sorts of fruits of the Bible. And he built the school, he built the church, and he also convinced the railroad to come through. And this was because he had a nervous breakdown, and I just love that story.
Yeah, he had another one.
So we told you we were going to jump around. Okay, we're going to jump around. So now we're going to jump back. Okay, so David Caleb Cook's father and mother are right here. Ezra Sprague Cook and Permelia Milk. And I just have to say I love that name. Permelia Milk. Okay. So they were in New York. And there was Ezra must have been quite the entrepreneur, as was David, because he had a business there. Unfortunately, it went bankrupt, and they, like many others, decided to try to recoup their losses by moving west. So they had a family conference, according to memoirs anyway, and I envisioned it more. Ezra just decided they were going to do it, but I guess it was a family conference, and they moved here to a farm near Wheaton. David was, there were 8 children in the family. I don't think we said that before. David was the youngest. I think they call him the littlest and the last.
Right.
And he worked on the farm like they all did. Outside of Wheaton. Now, of course, as a minister's son, did I mention that Ezra's a minister? No. I don't think I said that.
I think he was.
So Ezra Sprague is a minister. And Ezra, of course, was educated. He was bookish, so was David Caleb. At least he was bookish. And he wanted to be educated. So he wanted to go to Wheaton College. The family moved here in 1860. That's the year that Wheaton College was founded. And he was only 10, but he knew about it and he wanted to go to college. And as he got a little bit farther along in his teenage years, he tried to, well, how am I going to pay for college? And the only thing that was really available to him and young men like him out on the farm where they could really make some good money was to trap. So he would trap and stretch the pelts and sell the pelts, and he absolutely hated that. But it was the way that he made enough money to start school. He did start at Wheaton, but unfortunately when he was working back on the farm during that time, he got a sliver in one of his eyes from the corn fodder, and the doctor didn't get it all out, so it became infected and they had to go to a Chicago specialist to have it removed. But by that time, whatever the disease that it created was pretty serious and it had spread to the other eye. So you know, he's trying to go to college, he's this young man, and now he has to face the prescription, which is total darkness. So he has to be in a dark room for, I don't know how long that period was. His mom, Marguerite, read to him so that he could keep up with his lessons, but that just turned out to be impractical. So he never did finish from Wheaton College, even though he started there. I wanted to say something about the times that shaped the publishing company in those late years in 1880, because the founding of Wheaton, let me explain it by talking about Wheaton. So Wheaton College was headed up by Jonathan Blanchard, who was a well-known abolitionist. So Wheaton was dedicated, among all other things, and evangelical Christians in general, who were from the North, were dedicated to the Underground Railway and helping runaway slaves and the abolition of slavery. They had other concerns too. Temperance was a big one. But they were also concerned about care of the mentally ill. So there were socially progressive social justice issues that were real strong in the late 1800 evangelical movement. So those were the influences that were shaping David. And we haven't said too much about his Sunday school work in Chicago, and we probably should have said more, but that's part of the reason he did it, both before and after the fire. But even before the fire, he was reaching out he was making Sunday schools. And so the story goes, according to memoirs, that he would approach street kids in Chicago, in rough neighborhoods, and he would say, where do you go to Sunday school? And they would say, nowhere. And he would say, well, I've just been looking for you. He said, I want you to be at fill in the blank next Sunday. And he said, where do you live? Let's go talk to your folks about it right now. So he was out there recruiting in his off hours. Remember, he's still doing the sewing machine business, right? But he's out there recruiting for his Sunday schools like that. And then after the fire, when people were desperate, and crime was rampant. I mean, the rest of the country was really trying to help Chicago recover from the fire. But David had decided to stay, because a lot of people left, of course. They didn't have anything there. He decided to stay and redouble his efforts to work with those kids and to build those Sunday schools. And that was just before the move to Elgin, and when he was starting to get the print site up and running, and then moved here.
Just go out and try to recruit people for your church that way today.
Yeah.
Where are your parents? I don't think, but you have to admire what he did.
That's a nice picture. We should have had that up. That's a nice picture of David Caleb. My favorite name for his Sunday school, when he got to the point where he could actually build a building in Chicago that would house printing operations, because he was able to do that before they moved to Elgin. They actually shipped presses from Chicago to Elgin, down when the location was here in the what I remember is the YMCA. Anyway, what was I going to say? Oh, so he built this structure 3 stories high, and the first 2 stories were full of the printing presses and the offices that he had, because he was getting pretty big at that point. But he left the 3rd floor open, just one big open room, and that was because he wanted that to be his Sunday school. So he left that one open room, and I loved what he called it. He called it everybody's mission. And he's still in the rough district of Chicago, and he's everybody's mission. That's what he was devoted to.
Fantastic. He did some things right. Okay, here is Marguerite. Another picture of her. You can compare it with the portrait there, because somehow Al had to figure out who that was in the portrait. And I think she was a great motivator. I think just in my own personal view, if you'd gone back to those days with today's thinking, maybe it would have been the Marguerite Cook Publishing Company, or Marguerite and David, because I think she deserved, as many women deserve, helping someone who got all the credit, but they were women, so their name was not used in the promotion and so on. And that, I think she was really vital. It had to be. You can't imagine him starting this all on his own. And she said, "What are you doing out there?" That wouldn't happen. And this is our favorite photo of her. It's just a really neat neat one. And Marky got me this. We finally found, we had different versions of it, but none of them as good as this one, as terms of exposure and stuff.
So this is our dad in Marguerite's lap. And this is Lois, who Bruce mentioned tragically died in Chicago in a car crash in her early 20s. And the other little one is Francie.
Aunt Francie, yeah, that's right.
To us, Aunt Francie.
I always call Aunt Francie. But, and grandchildren they had. He loved to play with the grandkids. And again, we'll have a few Davids interspersed in there. We haven't worked out who is who there.
Well, the one on the bottom is great. So that's David and Lois. That's our dad and Lois, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Greg is real good with names. And he can remember people that worked at the company. I'm not so good at that. Here's David C. Jr., David C. II. Okay, and he married Frances Lois Kerr. So that's the name when we talk about Aunt Francie. She comes.
So we have two Francises in the family.
Yeah.
And we have two Ezras too, but we didn't talk about the other one. But this is David Carl.
And here is Frances Kerr Cook. There was a time when she was sitting in this chair looking just like this, and being a little twerp, I went over and untied her shoelace, knowing full well she could never tie it. And then it came that somebody said, Frances, why is your shoe untied? I don't know, I think it must have been Bruce came over and untied it.
Which has been his reputation.
Ever since. So anyway, I had to go over, I had to be the one to tie it, and all that time, it's kind of slow to tie somebody else's shoe when you're 8 or whatever I was. And then she was letting me know that was not proper behavior.
So Frances died in 1950, the year I was born, so I never knew her.
Had nothing to do
And
with
her house is she's the 200 River Bluff house, the 200 River Bluff Road. So this is, her Frances and Carl Jr. David Jr. Thank you.
There you go.
David Carl. I can't get that.
No, he makes mistakes. And my point here was, and to have the slide in here, was there was a period after 1932 when David II died. My dad didn't start right away. He was in Chicago, University of Chicago, still in theological studies and all the things you need for publishing. And so then she took over for a while and then turned it over to him at one point, and E.E. Stewart helped him at first. He was the one to guide him. Here's your office. Here are the people. Introduce him around. But very shortly, E.E. died. And it was very sad for everyone at that time because he was so instrumental in the company's history throughout the years.
Yeah, he was the rock. So.
Yeah. And we all have distributed these among our family members, the woodcuts and things she did to illustrate on the side. She would illustrate children's books for Scott Forsman and little companies like that. Anyway, so she was pretty good. And then we had a lot of paintings she did out in California, landscapes and desertscapes and so on.
Yeah, she was a commercial illustrator.
Yeah, skilled person. And here he is, Daddy, David III, and that's in the office where he's right. And you guys will remember going in and using crayons, and he had little things.
Pictures for little panels on the
Picture of Mom there, yeah. And in his second drawer, he had the crayons.
Those pictures weren't important. It was the ones that we drew.
Right.
We drew in there.
Yeah, he did have. Yeah, he did have a panel desk on the front. You're remembering putting the. Yeah.
It was fun to go through that. Okay. And here's his bride, our mom, Anne. And we have a large picture of that somewhere. Okay. And here's a picture of the family to prove that against your objection, that we did have dark hair.
Yes. That's fine. Oh, not to play that part up.
That's why that picture is here. So if anybody has questions, you know. It wasn't dyed. And here are the family homes. We'll be talking. 200 is where Dad grew up and mowed the lawn all week. Huge lawn. Gifford and Division, we all know, is just a few blocks down. Still there, but not in great shape. And then 32 River Bluff is where we lived. The question now is, will Gifford and Division continue to exist? And we have some 3-generation pictures of the 3 cooks. This is the real photograph they're able to take. And later on, the foundation made a little booklet, Let There Be Light, and did a stylized version of the same thing. That's kind of nice to have those. We're trying to bring out the things that the company did for the city.
And some of those are for employees too, like the
Some of
Olivet
those are.
Apartments.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Then we have a quote from Alf. Of course, he didn't know what was going to happen in 1995, but he says, the firm became the most stable and long-lived of Elgin's numerous manufacturers. It's in his book. So I guess it didn't live up to that entirely. But here's the one that Liz mentioned, the Elgin Improvement Association, 1881-83. I'm trying to remember the fellow's name, but he was recruiting companies to come to Elgin. And that's where David Caleb began to participate, because he then saw the advantages, the river, the railroad. That's how he was looking. I can make my own electricity. I have access to the railroad for my mail, that kind of thing. So that, and it's not in Chicago. So that's one. And then the other one is,
Second
second largest Elgin employer. And the higher one would have been Watch Company or
Would have been
Sherman
Watch
Hospital.
Company.
Yeah. Sherman
I give
Hospital
you
was
the
close
Watch
too.
Company.
Yeah, that's right, the Watch Company. And they both had leave, I guess. Okay, they helped with the Pave All street paving schedule. I mean, they participated because they had to pave Grove Avenue, which is now Grove Avenue. I think it was a River Street or something then. And I think there were trolley tracks there. So they participated that way. I have a picture of another area there. And here's a church. Anybody recognize that one? We've been talking about the First United Methodist, then just First Methodist Church. And he was part of that. And there, I don't know how many know that there was a tornado in 1920 that tore down the ramparts and so on quite seriously. So he helped to rebuild. At first, he gave some money in 24, and then I think they wanted to do a major reconstruction of it. And he came in to help with 3 conditions that Al has pointed out to me. One was you had to come in the front door only, so you would see the sanctuary. Well, now there are 2 back doors, but I guess there weren't then. There would have to be anyway for safety, right? But that's one condition. Another one was it had to be Bedford stone and not brick, which was what was in, they were planning to do a stone thing. And I think if you go to the University of Chicago, you'll see some buildings done in a similar style with those stones. And I'm thinking Gillick might have been, there's an architect that is in common to those buildings, but I could be way wrong on the name. I'm always wrong on names. And the last thing, he wanted a multiplicity of Sunday school rooms. And how many rooms did you say there were, Alan?
I've heard various numbers, but it could be as many as 106 rooms in the church. Yeah, little tiny rooms, and we would sit around a table and 10 kids and a teacher reading David C. Cook papers.
There you go. Good boy, good boy. That's right.
Yes, we started a big group. And Bruce, there's the same architect did First Methodist in Evanston. And if you ever drive by that church, it looks remarkably like this church. And I think he dusted off the Evanston prints and changed a few things, and we had the Elgin church.
Wait, they copied us, right?
No, the Evanston was first.
Oh, geez. What can I say? Okay, well, we'll roll on down here. They had a company orchestra. How many heard the company orchestra? Not too many. This is 1929. I don't know how long they lasted, but they had an orchestra. I don't think they played the Beatles. And here's one Greg and I remember. We didn't really use this, at least not in our
No, but I remember that.
But on the wall, on the way out, next to the salt machine where you could get a salt pill, was, when there wasn't air conditioning, there was a time clock. And here it is. And then they changed, they led in reducing work hours, because in those days you worked many hours on Saturday. So they cut out Saturday overtime and moved it from 5:30, 5 o'clock, and later 4 o'clock. Is that right, if I'm reading it right? Mm-hmm. It's making a shorter day. So then you'd be there getting your work done, and the day ended, and you weren't finished. You wanted to stay later,
So
right?
they come in Saturday anyway, and then you check in with Scott.
That's what I did, right? He was the gate guard. That's right. That's right. And you had to be nice to him. Then they did Olive Apartments, and it was at 814 Brook Street. If you look at this building, you wouldn't think of much, but during the Depression years, the girls that were doing the writing stayed there. And they had probably like a house mother, and it was provided by the company because they needed employees that weren't, the guys had all gone to war, right? So whatever, and I don't know what this, I'm getting my time periods mixed up, but that's a permanent condition with me, to have time periods mixed up. So, but one interesting thing about this, if you drew a line from there to the company, it's like a block and a half. When you cross an oval grassy area called Esmeralda Park back there. And if you were to go there with your kiddie friends, in the winter, where there was a foot of snow, there'd be this place where there was no snow. And you go look and see what it was. It was a metal plate covering a little trough-like thing that went all the way over, and that connected the company boiler to all of the apartments. And it was heated from the company boiler. So that to me is just fascinating, because I remember as a kid looking at that, you put your hand on it, it's warm. Okay, did that for Elgin. I mean, what can I say? Had a tennis court, more than one, later covered up, and a bowling alley in the basement. Gone, right? Is there any sign of the bowling alley left? No, they took it away. But those were things they did. And then I found this picture of a whistle, and I feel bad because there's a better whistle at the end of the hall on the way out. You can see. But I dug this thing out of somewhere on the, the things you get on images. The whistle, as of 1947, blew. Right? Anybody wants? Let's do it. 7:20 in the morning, 7:30, noon, 12:50, 1 o'clock, and 4:30. Okay, now came 1947, and the executives were thinking, do we really need this whistle anymore? So they did a survey that's in, I don't have it on that thing there, but it's in the, where's this from? Oh, the Jacksonville Daily Journal, and one is from the Tribune, both from 1947. They need that whistle, they say. They called people in town and determined that they would keep the whistle. And they did, even though they wanted to shut it down. But then there was a time when they didn't have any more presses that ran on 24 volts DC, which is why they had a boiler running a generator. So they had to turn off the generator and they had to turn off the boiler, and the whistle was gone because the whistle used steam from the boiler. So that's my whistle story. Oh, and there's at 1975, they had a 100-year celebration, and we have a little cover sheet over here from it. And at that time, they were very proud to be part of the community and did imitations of David Caleb and so on. And some of you may have seen this presentation. But that was something they did for the community. And now, what they didn't do for the community was they moved to Colorado Springs. And that may amaze you how large that building is. I thought it might be just a little Quonset hut or something, but no, it's this. So I've not been there. So here's our timeline. I don't know how much you want to dwell on timeline, but it does kind of take you through all the good times. 49, I guess, is significant. We haven't mentioned the foundation in terms of history. 49, the family assets were converted into a foundation. So instead of the family owning the company and having them come over and build the sandbox and things, suddenly the foundation owned the company, and that was a major change. And that continued to support Christian missions overseas. And I know we were doing a lot of that when we were there, and I don't know what they're doing today. 95 is when they moved to Colorado Springs. So that's kind of the end of the timeline.
Let's close off the formal part of the presentation here. I know Bruce and Greg are going to stay around and answer all your questions and hear your one-on-one stories, and that's great. Listening to Bruce and Greg talk reminded me that wealth has flowed through Elgin in several waves. The dairy industry in the early years, and of course later the watch company and all that meant. But publishing also has played a big part in Elgin's history. Here in the David C. Cook was once the second largest employer in Elgin. The Brethren Publishing Company still functions here in Elgin to this day. There was other publishers that came and went. Publishing was a source of wealth to Elgin, especially realizing that the ownership lived in Elgin as well as the employees. That kept the money here in town, and that made it very, very important. And a big round of applause for these guys.